Hey guys, welcome to another lesson. In the last lesson, we went over what HTML attributes are and how we can use them to link in and link to different pieces of the web and different assets like images. So just to provide a quick review, HTML is made up of elements, really layers of elements, right? We start with our HTML element, then we get into our head, we get our body, and then we have elements that we can nest within those. Elements can also have what we call attributes. Now, attributes are basically a key value pair that we can associate to an element. What does that mean? That means that we could do something like this, where we have this anchor tag, and then on the opening element of this anchor tag, we can go ahead and put this href attribute on it, which stands for hypertext reference. The hypertext reference allows us to link out to different pages. So you can see here that the hypertext reference is linking out to google.com right here. Now, attributes aren't just used to provide functionality to a given element like we see here, right? I'm just going to go ahead and get out of my Teams real quick. We can also use attributes to link to specific assets that are within our environment. In this case, we're linking to this overlay vignette that allows us to render this little kind of transparent faded image here, right? And the attribute that we put on here is the source of the image element. Now, another attribute that we used here was the width, and we put a width right onto this image, and we could modify this if we wanted to make the width of this image bigger and even bigger then, right? So we can use this to control the width of the image. So as you can see here, we can have multiple attributes or more than one attribute on any given element, which is pretty cool. But now in this lesson, what I want to do is I want to start to introduce us to the idea of styling the page with something called CSS. Now, CSS is a whole big topic in itself that allows us to style or make the page look as we want it, right? It really gives us a full creative tool set for us to be able to style the page. All right, so cascading style sheets is what CSS stands for. And we'll get into the reasons why it's named that, for cascading style sheets, right? The words style sheets come from a lot, really before the web, where folks in like the newspapers and things like that actually had style sheets that they had to follow that allowed them to style the different print that would go out. My grandfather actually worked in that space, which is kind of interesting. He did a lot of the letter typing and stuff. Lithography, I think it was called. But it came from that world. Now the cascading part of it, we'll get into a little bit more as we start to build out some of the CSS. So what is CSS? So a great resource is the w3schools.com, and they have a slew of information about CSS. And I recommend that you pop onto this site. I'll post it in the course here in the links. And go through a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff, there's a ton of it. We definitely can't cover this in a semester. There's a lot of different things you can experiment with. But CSS basically has a completely different syntax than HTML. CSS itself, just like HTML, is not a programming language, right? Unlike JavaScript, which is the other third component in this world of web development, CSS is not a programming language. JavaScript is, HTML is not. Right? So CSS really gives us tools to be able to style the actual page. And as you can see here, the syntax follows this basic syntax, right? We have what's called a selector. So we define some type of selector. What are we selecting on the page, right? What are we actually styling, right? So in order for us to style something, we need to tell the computer that this is what we want to style, right? We could style any element on the page. And as you'll see, we can also style based on attribute, which is really powerful. And there's a couple of special attributes we can use to hook in to the page and select by attribute. It becomes very powerful. Now, once we have our selector defined, we now have inside of these little curlies, just like we saw in JavaScript, right? Little curly brackets. we can put different declarations. Now these declarations consist of two things, a property and a value. And there are a bunch of different properties, and for each property, there are a bunch of different values. So you can see here this example on W3 Schools is selecting the H1 element and then saying any H1 element that you see, color it blue and make the font size 12px. Now these properties do follow a specific syntax, and like I said, there are a bunch of them. So there's a lot of different combinations that we can kind of put forth here with CSS. CSS is a huge topic in itself, right? It's something that I've been using for well over a decade, and I'm still learning daily in terms of the different things that you could do. It's evolving over time. Once we get into layout, you're going to see how we can define layouts with CSS. Extremely powerful, and it's something that is, it's just like the web. Things are changing constantly, and new, simpler ways, maybe in some cases harder ways to do certain things are emerging. But right now, we're looking at the basics, and how do we get started with this? So if we wanted to style a web page, say for example, this basic web page that we're developing here, we can actually put the CSS directly onto the page. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. Some ways are really not the right way to do it, or they may be convenient but not really extensible if you're working in a larger team or larger projects. And some ways are better, where you can actually separate your CSS into separate files and manage your CSS in different ways. For now, I'm going to actually start to write some CSS directly on this page, but I'm not going to embed it on any element. That would be called inline CSS. I'm going to do it right up here in the head for now, and then we're going to see how we can extract it out into its own file. So right after the title here, and I encourage you to play along in your environments, right after the title, we're going to go ahead and define a new style. And we're going to use the style element for this. So I'm going to open up the little bracket here, and then I'm going to say style. And now I'm going to give this style an attribute. I'm going ahead and say that this is a type of text/CSS. Now notice the syntax I did there. The syntax follows the same syntax of the attributes that we explored in the last lesson. So the attribute name here is type, and the value, which is wrapped in quotes, is text/CSS. Now I'm going to go ahead and close that element, and it'll close the element with a closing tag here. And now within here, we can now write CSS. So we will not be writing HTML in here, we can write CSS. So let's go ahead and try to use this selector that's on this sample here. I'm going to go ahead, instead of H1, because I don't think we have an H1. Oh, we do have an H1 here. Okay, awesome. So let's try to style this H1. So the first piece we need in order to style is the actual selector. In this case, it's the H1. Now we're going to go ahead and open those curlies, hit enter. And now here is where we can put our declarations, which consist of properties and values. So let's go ahead and add the color property, and let's make it blue. And now, oh, what's going on? Oh, there we go. Now look at that. The H1 that's on the page is now blue. Say, for example, we want to change that and make it red. There we go. Now it's red. Or maybe let's make it yellow. There we go. It's yellow and very hard to read. So let's go ahead and keep it. Make it tomato. There are some weird. There's some weird colors in the tool set here that we can use. You could also use straight hexadecimal declaration. So I could say something like this. I want to make it red and just do hex. You can also use RGBA if you wanted to add alpha transparencies in your color. But for now, let's go ahead and just make it tomato. I spell it right. Tomato. Oh, I'm having a brain freeze here. I'm just going to make it blue then. Oh, what am I doing? I'm sorry. You don't put it in quotes there. I was just putting it in quotes. So let's go ahead and make it tomato again. Okay, awesome. There we go. So now what we can also do is we have, within these curly brackets, we have a slew of tools that we can use here. And it's really a matter of exploring a lot of them in many cases and trying to figure out what you want to accomplish. Like, for example, if we wanted to change the font size, we could just type font, and you'll see all of these different selectors that we can use, all these different properties that we can use in order to change pieces of the font, right? So I'm going to go here and let's take a look at font size. And I'm going to say font size equals 2px. Now that's really small. Look at that. So let's make it 20px. Now let's make it 25px. That's a little bit better. So we can play around with this value here, and this does take a certain number here, and this number, what we're using is represented in pixels. So px stands for pixels. There are a multitude of different types of values that we can put in here. Right now, kind of the best practice I think is to use relative ems. I'm not going to go too much into what that represents, but like if I say 2em, you'll see that it does also change the size here, right? But basically that is 2 times the default size of the user's browser. So typically a browser's default is 16px. So if I say 2, I could do em, I could do rem. One is relative. And that's relative to its parent container. We're not going to get into that funky stuff right now. It gets a little crazy. But if we go 2em, that means 2 times the actual browser's default. So if the default is 16px, that means that the actual font size in pixels here is 32 pixels. So that can get funky. A lot of things in CSS can get funky, to be honest with you. It's definitely a crazy world when you start to do a lot of front-end styling. So now we have our H1 and it's styled with a font size of 2em. Awesome. Let's go ahead and add another selector. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and just go right below here and add another selector. That would be wrong, right? What we want to do is we want to stack these bad boys like this. Boom. So right below this curly bracket, I'm going to go ahead and add another selector. Let's say, let's style the actual paragraph here. So I'm going to go ahead and just say P, open curly, and then close curly. And now within the paragraph, say for example, we wanted to align the text center. We could say text align center. And look at that. Now the text is aligned center. Awesome. So we can go ahead, we can change the color, we can change the font size. We can do a lot of different things here, right? I'm not going to actually align the center. I'm going to take this out and let's just go ahead and make the font size maybe 1.2 em, right? So we can use floating point values here, right? Decimals to be able to define ranges in between two numbers, which is pretty powerful. So right here, if I just stop right here, this is really the basics of CSS. This is the basic syntax, right? We can keep going, but the basic syntax is you're going to select an element on the page using the selector, and then you're going to define different properties here to be able to style the page, right? So this page right here really kind of outlines that quite well, right? We have the selector, the declarations, and within them the properties and the values. And it's pretty short here, right? So what I'd recommend is we go through these different pages, and this is gonna take us right to where we're gonna discuss now, which is basically styling by not just the element, but by certain attributes. So let's see how that works. So if we go down here into our HTML, and let's go ahead and add a couple of more links. So I'm gonna call this link go to Google, and let's go ahead and call this link, where do we want to go? Let's go to we could say Facebook, I guess, right? We'll go to Facebook, And then we'll have another link, and we'll say go to, I'm having a hard time figuring out places to go. Let's go to, I guess, all the big guys. We'll go to, I don't know, Snapchat. All right. So we're going to have to change the links here, and we'll go to Facebook, and then we'll go to snapchat.com, right? Cool. So 2 of these are actually social networks, and 1 of them is a search engine, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a new attribute, and we're going to add a new attribute to all 3 of these anchor tags. And now the attribute name is going to be called class. So we're going to add a class to these elements. So I'm going to go ahead up here, and right after the anchor tag, I'm going to put a space, and I'm going to say class equals, and I'm going to call it whatever I want. I'm just completely making this up. So I could just call it search, right? Just to symbolize that this is a search engine link. And then here, I'm going to call this class equal social. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the Snapchat link. So as you can see here, the visual, whoops, I clicked the link. The visual representation of these links have not changed, right? This one's purple just because I visited it already, but these 2 are not. So that is just the default styling within the browser itself. But now if we look at the actual markup, if I right click this and go to inspect, and we look at the actual elements here, you'll see that this element has the social class attribute on it. This does as well. And then this has the search class attribute on it. Awesome. Now what can we do with that? What does that give us the capabilities to do? So now what we can do is we can use in our CSS, I'm going to go ahead right to the end of this paragraph selector and hit enter. I'll hit enter twice just to give us a little breathing room. And instead of putting in a straight HTML element like we did here and here, we're going to put in a class name. Now class names start with a dot. So instead of just typing social, which would look for an actual element, which is not correct, we're going to put dot social, right? Or dot search. Let me do the search first. So I'm going to say dot search, and I'm going to open up those curlies, close those curlies. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to now style it a little bit. So let's continue to roll with this whole color and font size flow that we're doing here. So I'm going to say the color of the search is going to be say red. And now look at that. The color just changed on us, right? And I also don't want the underline to be there. So I'm going to use the text dash decoration, and I'm going to say none. And you'll see the underline just goes away. I can also, if I wanted to, just say border 1px solid black. And now we're going to see, oh, we're not seeing a border around it. Why aren't we seeing a border? This is something that we're going to go into a bit more in probably subsequent lessons. We're going to talk about block and inline elements. The anchor tag is actually an inline element called inline because it's designed to actually live in a paragraph. But you can use the display here to say display, I can type, block, to make it a block. And now you'll see there it'll have a border around it. And you know what, too? I'm going to go ahead and say text align center. Okay, awesome. So that's looking pretty good. We have this big chunky button on the page now that can take us right to Google. Excellent. Now, what if we wanted to style the actual social class as well? If we wanted to style it the same exact way, we can actually link these up by just putting a comma after search and then saying dot social. Now look what's going to happen. Boom. Now everything is styled the same exact way using the same exact CSS. Awesome. Now notice a subtle thing that just happened here. Search is on one element, right? The class attribute is only on one element, but social is on two. And this selector now selected 2 elements to style. So that's mega powerful. So what we could do is we could basically say, hey, anything with the social class is going to have this style, right? And if we say we added another one, I'm just going to go ahead and post this here and just put, you know, a random, what's another social network we can link to here? What's the TikTok, right? We go to TikTok. And now you'll see all of them are styled the same exact way. Awesome. But now, say you didn't want the social links to be styled the same exact way. What we could do is we could take this out of here and we can put it in its own, completely own selector, and then define our own styling for that selector. So now here, you can see here that the Google link is still styled the way we want it, but these are not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just say the color is, well, you know what I'll do? I'm going to copy this, paste this here, and then just change some things here. I'm going to make this blue. Now look at that. Now we have these social links have a completely different style. Now instead of, let's see, instead of just this white background, why don't we go ahead and make the background red? All right, boom, look at that. Now we've got 3 different buttons styled all the same, and then one button that's not, right? With 2 different types of class attribute selectors. So this is a mega powerful concept in CSS. It allows us to define as little CSS as possible and then apply it to as much of the page as necessary. So I think I'm going to stop here. I don't want to go too long in this lesson because I want you to play around a little bit with this idea. And between styling elements and styling classes, there's a lot that can be done here. And really exploring on this site the different types of declarations that we can do between color and text align and things like that. You could do a lot of different styles here. And we're gonna continue to build on these concepts in subsequent lessons. You're gonna see how we can continue to use these classes, and then I'm gonna introduce the idea of the ID. And we're gonna dive into a little bit more about what I briefly talked about with this display block. And we're gonna look at inline and block elements. All right, awesome guys. I'll see you next time. Thanks.